There was a time not too long ago where the future felt new and exciting. Not necessarily realistic, but bold, messy, and full of weird shapes and loud colors. Everything looked like it was trying to say something, even if it didn't really know what. But now it feels like everything looks like this. Same fonts, same buildings, the same vibe wherever you go. It's all clean and optimized, like any creativity in life has been sucked out of it. So the question is, did things actually get worse, or are we looking back through rose-colored glasses? In this video, I want to explore how big tech and corporate logic might have stripped the color out of daily life, how aesthetics became a business decision, and how design started chasing efficiency instead of emotion. Now, before we start blaming minimalism or capitalism for sucking the life out of everything, it's worth addressing this question first. Are we just nostalgic? Because nostalgia isn't just sentimentality, it's also a coping mechanism. In times of uncertainty or stress like political instability, economic anxiety, or burnout, our brains tend to romanticize the past. Psychologists call this rosy retrospection, a cognitive bias where negative details fade and positive feelings get amplified over time. Really think about this. When you reminisce, you don't remember how slow the internet was in 2005. You remember the thrill of logging into AIM to talk to your crush, or the joy of choosing a MySpace song like it said something profound about who you are. And that warmth you feel? That's not necessarily because the world was objectively better, it's because the version of you that lived in it hadn't been shaped yet by deadlines, burnout, or existential dread. That being said, nostalgia isn't only prevalent when you are personally going through something, it's also cultural. Roughly every 2 to 3 decades, we go through what are referred to as nostalgia cycles. It usually happens when the people who grew up in a certain era get old enough to enter creative industries like film, fashion, and design, and they start remixing what shaped them. For example, the 2000s idolized the 1980s. They brought back flare jeans, bright patterns, neon everything, and arcade culture. The 2010s went back to the 90s. Things like grunge fashion, analog tech, and grainy camcorder footage became popular again. Though you could argue that a lot of that stuff is popular right now too, hence why I say that these nostalgic cycles are roughly 20 to 30 years. And now, here in the 2020s, we're in a moment where the early 2000s have become an aesthetic again. This is part of the reason why we're now seeing endless videos highlighting early 2000s toys, restaurants, and early internet sites. Through rosy retrospection, we are reminiscing on a time that, for the majority of the people occupying the internet, represented simplicity, novelty, and a lack of worries. So yes, some of this longing for color and personality is probably just nostalgia going through one of its cycles, but like I hinted at earlier, nostalgia is also usually running parallel with what's happening in the present moment. We don't just look backward randomly, we often look back when the now feels empty. So although I do think nostalgia plays a huge role in why we look back in the past and think it was so much more full of life, maybe we're not just missing the past. Maybe we're reacting to a present that feels increasingly devoid of meaning. Let's hold on to that idea as we move forward, but first I want to talk about today's sponsor, Hostinger Horizons. It feels like standing out for a job these days is an impossible task. You need 5 years of experience in a field you can't get experience in until you get experience, which you can't get because you don't have 5 years of experience. Brutal. But one thing that helped me when I used to do freelance video editing was having a website that had my portfolio on it. This is basically a necessity now if you want potential employers to take you seriously in just about any field. On Hostinger Horizons, you can create a web page for your portfolio within minutes. All you gotta do is type in your prompt. For this example, I said, create a sleek but creative web page for my video editing portfolio. Then Hostinger Horizons will write all the code for you and give you your web page in a few minutes. There were a few adjustments I wanted to make to refine the page, like adding a colored gradient on top and changing the colors to be more blue, so I told the software to make those changes, and it did, again, without me having to code at all. I know what you're thinking, why not just use ChatGPT for this? It's free. Well, that's because Hostinger Horizons manages your domain, hosting, and email in one place, and all you gotta do to publish your website is hit publish. It's also got 24/7 support and a 30-day money-back guarantee, so if you want to launch your own personal website without learning all the technical aspects of coding, you can click the first link in my description, and if you use my code COLE, you will get 10% off your first month. There's a design language that defined the early 2000s, a visual identity that at the time felt like a preview of the future. You saw it in default wallpapers, loading screens, early mobile phones, even the way user interfaces looked on your desktop. It was glossy, full of reflections, gradients, liquid textures, and nature designs, like everything had been dipped in melted plastic or lit by fluorescent lights underwater. This is what designers today refer to as Fruitger Aero. The name comes from two of its most recognizable components, the Fruitger font, which was clean, modern, and everywhere at the time, and Aero, which was the design language Microsoft introduced for what was supposed to be their next generation operating system. The operating system went under the pre-release codename Windows Longhorn. Bill Gates said it would be Microsoft's most ambitious software launch of the decade, combining next-level security, improved media sharing, and a user-friendly interface based on extensive usability studies. Behind the scenes, Microsoft engineers were showing off floating windows, blurred backgrounds, and fluid motion effects that were meant to make everything feel more immersive. One Wired article even quoted Gates saying, "Windows applications don't look all that great, do they?" and urged developers to take a leap forward. But it never really ended up happening. The project ballooned in complexity and kept missing deadlines. The vision was ambitious, but maybe too ambitious for the hardware of the time. Eventually, Microsoft scrapped most of Longhorn's features and released Windows Vista in its place. Vista kept the Aero branding, but the final product was stripped down, buggy, and poorly received. Still, that brief period of anticipation did capture something that, looking back, can be most accurately described as a potential tech utopia of the future. Back in the early 2000s, the internet was still this new, strange, exciting thing. The millennium had just flipped over, and the tech world hadn't yet been swallowed by surveillance and monetization. Globalization was accelerating, and our ability to access any information in seconds instilled many positive possibilities to what the future could look like as we integrated more technology into our lives. As a result, a lot of the early internet and computer products represented what we thought tech could be: expressive, experimental, and a little weird. And then that dream dissipated. By the early 2010s, that bright, bubbly version of the future quietly disappeared. Gradients were replaced with flat color, shadows were stripped away, and logos were simplified. It was the beginning of a very different design philosophy, one that prioritized clarity, uniformity, and scale. Instead of building toward a dream, we started designing for efficiency, and when that shift happened, a different set of priorities quietly took over. Priorities driven less by imagination and more by metrics, performance, cost, and brand cohesion. In order to fully understand this shift, we have to take a look at the forces that shape what gets made in the first place, and that means we need to talk about economics. When companies scale, especially in the West, the guiding question changes. It no longer becomes, what's the most interesting version of this, but rather, what's the most repeatable version of this? It's here that a specific kind of logic kicks in, a logic built around one core idea: endless growth. This is the belief that a company's success should be measured not by quality or creativity, but by how much it can expand and how reliably it can generate returns for its shareholders. That belief, what economists call shareholder primacy, became dominant in the US starting in the 1980s after Milton Friedman's now infamous claim that, quote, "the social responsibility of business is to increase its profits." This single idea has more or less reshaped how products get made, how spaces get built, and how we define what's good design. Part of the reason this mindset became so dominant is because more companies started going public, especially in the late 20th century. Once a company is publicly traded, it's not just answering to its customers anymore, it's answering to institutional investors, hedge funds, and banks who expect quarterly growth. The mission shifts from building something meaningful to hitting your next earnings target, and if you don't hit that target, well, you're kind of fucked. Your stock drops, leadership gets replaced, and sometimes the entire company is gutted and resold. And when those companies start getting acquired by larger parent corporations, a trend that's accelerated in nearly every sector from retail to tech to real estate, you start to see creative decisions made less by individuals and more by holding groups. So if a restaurant group finds that a certain shade of beige encourages faster customer turnover, or that a certain type of signage tests well across markets, that becomes the standard, whether it's actually aesthetically pleasing or not. And eventually the question stops being, what's a cool idea for this location, and becomes, what version of this concept is most likely to satisfy the people funding it? Take apartments, for example. In my video on America's luxury apartment crisis, I discuss why every apartment labeled luxury looks exactly the same, is poorly built, and is only designed to eventually be sold off to a bigger company. Another example is fast casual restaurants. If you walk into a Sweetgreen, a Cava, a Chipotle, or any number of interchangeable spots, you'll notice the same carefully curated minimalism, like polished concrete floors, matte black fixtures, neutral tones, and clean sans serif typography arranged over menus. And when you compare that to the color and vibrancy and creativity of restaurants like that in the past, let's say early 2000s or 90s, then the objective difference is clear. This isn't just copycat branding, it's the result of modular interior design principles, where fixtures and layouts are pre-selected to be cheap, replaceable, and scalable across hundreds of locations. And in the online world, we all can tell that the same thing is happening, only that it's happening even faster. When Apple stopped using skeuomorphic design with iOS 7, a style that used visual cues to imitate the texture, shape, or function of physical objects, and shifted to flat UI, it set a new precedent. Digital interfaces were no longer meant to be playful or metaphorical, they were meant to feel invisible, clean, and neutral. Just enough to guide you, but never enough to distract you. Pretty soon, Google, Microsoft, Spotify, and nearly every major tech platform followed suit, flattening, desaturating, and stripping their interfaces down to the most frictionless version possible. Not because users wanted it, but because flat design loads faster, scales better across screen sizes, and, you guessed it, converts more efficiently. I mean, really ask yourself, is this scalable? Can this really be efficient? Or as a company who's trying to maximize shareholder value, does this just make way more sense? We often talk about this shift as minimalism, but let's be honest, it's kind of not. Minimalism at its best is a philosophy, but what we have now is just standardization, a design made to offend no one, spark no creative interest in anyone, and most importantly, not slow anyone or anything down. This is the world we've built, or rather the world the biggest corporations in the world built. Now, did they intentionally secretly make it boring to purposefully suck the joy out of the things we interact with on a daily basis? You could argue that, but it's also because boring is easy to reproduce. It's cost effective, and it doesn't raise any eyebrows at investor meetings. Safeness, speed, predictability, and return on investment became the guiding design principles. But this is where we have to zoom out even more, because what we're seeing isn't just a design problem or even a business one. It's also turned into a cultural problem. We are stuck in what the New Republic calls the aesthetic prison of our time in their piece, The Age of Cultural Stagnation, which I will be referencing for the next little bit of this video. We're not locked into this aesthetic against our will, but we help reinforce it with every scroll, click, and view. As critic Kyle Chayka argues in his book Filter World, culture is increasingly created not for meaning, but for algorithms. To succeed, an artistic work must be engineered for engagement, and since those algorithms prioritize similarity over surprise, what usually gets rewarded are the things that look like what already worked. The New Yorker's Jason Fargo put it well when he said, "The present state of culture feels directionless. When I was younger, I looked at cultural works as if they were posts on a timeline, moving forward from Monet year by year. Now, I find myself adrift in an eddy of cultural signs, where everything just floats and I can only tell time on my phone." And it's not just high culture feeling this drift. From fashion to food to interior design, we've all now seen that sameness reigns supreme. We live, as the New Republic puts it, in an aesthetic 1993 or 1983 or 1973, only now we have more streaming subscriptions and a list of trending TikTok sounds to keep up with. But the article also offers a really critical insight that often gets overlooked. It's not just big tech that's causing this. The cultural economy is shaped by everything from rent inflation to elite education barriers to corporate consolidation. As the article notes, and as I've noted in many past videos, cheap rent is nearly extinct in most cities. Art institutions are shrinking, and rising inequality means that, in many cases, only the privileged can afford to take creative risks in the first place. And if I could add in my own 2 cents, I also think that the decline of third places, a concept that I have also talked about in a ton of my past videos, contributes to this as well. Cafes, bars, libraries, those informal community spaces where people used to just exchange ideas, hang out, and be, places where culture could grow without being forced to scale, have decreased significantly in the past couple decades. And in their place are these gig economy cafes and these private co-working spaces that require a swipe access membership. I don't know if you guys have seen these, but in Austin, where I'm living, I'm constantly getting localized ads on Instagram about these working club spaces, which to me at least sounds like a paid networking event designed as a casual hangout spot. And this trend seems to signal that if it can't be monetized, then it doesn't deserve to exist. With all that being said, I've gotta end this by inhaling some Hopium, as always. Give me that. Because beneath all this sameness, there's still signs of life. I really think we need to start asking ourselves, if the world we live in feels gray, predictable, and automated, what would it take to imagine something different? Not in some utopian, let's tear it all down type of way, but in the smaller choices, like the culture we choose to support on a daily basis. Yes, these systems might feel inescapable, but they're not unchangeable. Culture isn't something that happens to us, it's something we actively participate in. And even when it's flattened or commodified, we can still make things that don't work or don't work efficiently and don't fit into some sort of neat trend cycle. Despite everything I've said, there's still plenty of examples of artists online making great creative work that's not built for scale. Placing more of our emphasis and focus on these things, the things that feel like the genius of a human is behind it, that actually make us feel something, and promoting them is how the culture starts to shift. And we need that because the only thing more terrifying than a culture that stagnates is one where we forget what it feels like to be moved by something. And as dystopian as it might sound to try to offer this as a solution, when the average consumer shifts the culture toward more of these things that move us, the companies in charge of these products we consume will take note and start to realize that maybe stripping the life out of things and designing them for efficiency doesn't actually result in maximized profits in the long run. I feel like I got a small glimpse of what this could look like after hearing about Apple's latest worldwide developers conference. At the conference, they announced a huge UI overhaul to iOS 26, the first one in a decade. Liquid glass. When I scrolled through tech Twitter, it seemed like the general consensus was that liquid glass is not good. It is objectively a significant UI UX downgrade, as one Twitter user put it. But maybe that's exactly what we need. A cultural revival that shifts from efficiency and usability to the fun, novel, creative, expressive technology of the promised Fruitger Aero future we never got. If one of the largest tech companies in the world, valued at almost $3 trillion, is willing to take this kind of risk to breathe back life into a software and consequently our culture, then the companies who have a lot of say in our external environment and what that looks like surely can start to do this too. The truth is, history tends to move in waves. Even during long stretches of sameness, something eventually is gonna break through. The emotional intensity of the Baroque built on the harmony and balance of the Renaissance, pushing art toward spectacle and drama. Punk exploded in reaction to the polished excess of arena rock and disco. Some of the most innovative art scenes, like New York in the 70s or Berlin in the 90s, came out of economic decline, not prosperity. And I do think more third places will start to return the more that people realize how much they've missed being human in public. It's not always clean or fast, but culture has a way of leaking out from under whatever tries to contain it. And I'm sure that we can contribute to that leak right now, despite the stagnation that we feel like we're all currently facing, if we as consumers put more of our attention on promoting things that make it feel like the culture is evolving and moving forward. But if you want to make the biggest impact, of course, it's to become a creator and not a consumer. Go out there, try new things, Take risks. Create something that feels different and weird and isn't designed just so that it can garner a bunch of engagement. Do something fucking cool like that. That's how things start to change. Sounds like a message I need for myself. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, you'll probably like my video on why the internet feels so dead now. And yeah, go check that out if you want to, or go create something cool. And I'm signing off. Goodbye.